So a local area plan is a more detailed plan that's embedded in the official community plan. Every municipality is what in law is called a child of the province. So the province mandates through the Municipal Act that every community has an official community plan, and then that official community plan sets out in broad strokes what happens where. Basically, it's a land use plan that also locates the amenities for the community and sets certain targets for density. It's really about the physical form of the community. But it's an approximation. It's done on a broad basis, and it's renewed on a 5 to 10 year cycle. The key thing for the official community plan is to engage with the community and try to establish the goals, objectives, and principles that the community wants to live by, grow by, thrive by, and set those in place and identify the areas of potential change, which then go forward and become local area plans. The other thing that's important to understand in this sort of planning 101 is that the municipality really is also embedded in both a provincial and a regional process. So there are growth targets established for each municipality. Each municipality is mandated by law to create a statement that goes to the regional district about how their official community plan is going to fit with the overall growth strategy for the region. And I think we're going to hear from some of the other panelists about the large number of people that are expected to arrive in our region and how that is part of our housing challenge. Each municipal council in the region has some councillors that also are on the regional board. And it's a challenging job for them because they not only have to run for office on a platform where they state their objectives for the community and people vote for them based on that platform, but they also have to be part of this regional process, which may or may not dovetail easily with what their community directions are and what their political directions are. So the local area plan, as I understand it, is on sort of a second run up the mountain right now, a process going on. And people are being asked to look at different options and assess them.
What are we trying to achieve? And I think that's really fundamentally what should be driving this process. What do we want in our community? It's not about height. It's not really about the streams and the mixed use and things like that. It's really about the community first. Those other things follow. The form follows the function. What are we trying to achieve? And something that's really important, and it's driving so many things in British Columbia. I'm just going to flip on my now PowerPoint projector here. Is just understanding something so unique in West Vancouver that we need to understand so profoundly. And this is the demographic curve. This is age 0. We have a at age 14, we have a peak. And then around here, you're more likely to find unicorns than, people that actually own in West Vancouver, and that's in their 30s. And then we go up here, and we have another peak at 55, and then it goes down, and there's 10 people in there in over 100. But what's astonishing is in 15 years, more than half of the community is going to disappear. These people are going to disappear, and most of these people over 70 are going to disappear. What? Hey, you set me up. You set me up. What a great question. So where are they going? There's what's amazing about West Vancouver is it has incredible retention. It has one of the highest rates of retention of any municipality in BC in terms of people that want to stay here. But as we age, we go through big changes in our life, and the things that what's motivating people to move is downsizing, number one. And the big downsizing is outside of the region. The second big downsizing is inside the region. And the third one, they go to the cemetery. They tragically do. Those are the three things that are going on. And that change in population in terms of the net reduction in the population driven by deaths over births is really significant in West Vancouver. And I heard an amazing thing at a consultation here in West Van. In order to stay the same, we have to change. And I go, wow, is that ever resonant? And it really is. So one of the things that's so important in West Vancouver is how do we keep these people who want to leave the community. There are some things we can do to prevent people from going to the cemetery early. That's keeping them connected. It really is. And that's something that I think is important in this local area plan. But we also have to create diverse opportunities for people to downsize in a way that's really attractive. And ideally, you're not all going to agree with one another, right? But you're going to do so in a respectful way and figure it out. But we also want some of these young people to stay in the community as well. It's really important. Another element that I didn't see in here at all, which is a real challenge for West Vancouver, is workforce. When I was serving the District of West Vancouver to develop the climate plan, the number of staff that left the municipality while I was here, and that was just in the district, who were living in Abbotsford, in Surrey, in Langley, who found jobs elsewhere. Today is a day where people can get jobs anywhere. We have a flat labor force related to some of this stuff. And this is very unique. The biggest peak in British Columbia is 39. They're at the summit when you guys are in the valley. But thinking about demographic change is fundamentally important for understanding how to shape this local area plan. The one thing that I didn't see in here is workforce housing. And that's something that we have to think about really creatively and drive solutions that haven't been adopted in British Columbia in any meaningful way. But demography drives lots of things.
One of my community commitments, and I grew up in West Van. I went to high school. In fact, I see some grads that we were part of. And as the community has changed, and as we've changed, and I don't know if I necessarily like Alex's point about us visiting graveyards, that will happen. We need to think about what kind of housing, not only for those who live here, but for those who need to live here. And that's where that question of affordability comes in. One of the beauties of a local area plan process, and which is why I'm really, really pleased that we have an evening like tonight, is because I believe that there are fundamentally three pillars in a successful plan. And that is information, engagement, and planning. And how you're going to get information is through meetings such as this. The district has organized some fabulous meetings as well. And eventually in July, we'll get a plan of sorts. And then will come the mashing. And my hope is that in that plan, there will be some reflection of not where West Vancouver was 50 years ago, but of where West Vancouver will be 25 years from now, because that's what a plan is. It is not about 2023, it's specifically, the OCP says 2042. And that it will evolve over. So you'll hear things like we need 5,000 housing units, for example. The OCP has stated we need 5,000 new housing units. Not tomorrow. You don't create an OCP to make a change tomorrow morning. But over the next 22, 23 years. And it is my hope that within those units, we'll be able to talk about the kinds of things that Alex just mentioned in terms of, not, whether it's workforce housing, housing where people who work here will be able to live here, but equally seniors housing. Equally housing which, for example, will allow you to stay in your place as your children take over, 40-year-old, 50-year-old children take over the house, and you have a carriage suite or whatever it happens to be. That there are amenities as well, and we haven't talked about those, but also that there are amenities so that those of us, when we do need assistance or when we need to engage and congregate, that there will be seniors centers viably occurring, and that there will be various other ways in which we can engage. So that's why we need a local area plan process, and that's what we're doing tonight. And that's why I hope what will emerge through the wisdom of council is a plan that truly can, and not just survive 25 years, but truly thrive in the next 25 years for West Van.
I was going to talk about public consultation, because consultation is a real spectrum. And it's very hard to have truly intense public consultation for every plan that's done and for every project. And the opportunity to have these conversations that you're about to have around a table is really a key component of a successful consultation process. And the fact that volunteer nonprofit organizations are coming and offering these opportunities, as well as the district, I think is really important. There's been quite a spectrum of consultation across the region and across West Vancouver. The opportunity for people to learn is sometimes triggered by a process like one that Andy was involved in, or one that I was involved in just before that, the Rogers Area Plan, where council appointed a committee of residents to meet on a regular basis for over a year and learn about the details of the plan so that they could advise their neighbors and the rest of the community about the value of the plan. So I think that you're in sort of a middle point of the consultation process where you're being asked to engage around these three fairly elaborately detailed and graphically well presented options, and you should take that advantage. One of the last things I want to say about it is that the value of talking with your neighbors. You look at those plans, and the very first thing you do, because we're all a bit selfish, we look at the plan and we say, where's my house? What does it mean for me? And we might choose one of the three plans that avoids impacting our house. Then you come to a meeting like this and you talk to people who live in other parts of West Van and have other needs and other points in their demographic curve on their way to that peak that we're talking about. And you learn that your selfish needs have to be balanced with others, and I hope that will be part of your conversations now.
Thank you. Alex, back to you. So LAP's got to change. That all of us have spoken of, all three of you have spoken of tonight. They strengthen the sense of place, the importance of livability, the idea of the 15-minute city, etc. What are the objectives that really our audience should be thinking about when they're considering the options and ultimately what they want to share with their both the staff but ultimately the councillors who make the decision on this?
I think Andy has definitely articulated one, and I was alluding to it as well. And this is just, a housing stock that meets the current demographic reality and the emerging demographic reality. So it's got to be resilient. And I think there's a lot of good content in here, but I think we have to, 30% of our households are occupied by one person. And by 2050, it's going to be almost 50%. And so I kid you not when I say we have to think about how people connect. But we also have to think about how do we create a housing stock that matches that demographic reality. So in our multifamily, we should be thinking about lock-off suites, right? It's a suite that can, be 100% independent, but it may never be. And you can walk into a townhouse or an apartment like that, and you would never know that there's a lock-off suite there. but the plumbing is there, the electrical is there to throw something in. We should never build, a conventional single-detached home again. Every one of them should be secondary suite ready. It may never be used, but it creates that opportunity for a future owner to actually make it a secondary suite. They should also be accessible to ground floor at or slightly below grade, because with our aging demographic, there's more and more people with mobility issues. These are small little things that you walk through a neighborhood and you would never notice a difference whatsoever. We need more missing little, those things, and we need more of that missing middle. And clearly, the planners at the district are listening to the community, because there's nothing more than mid-rise here, right? So I think that that mid-rise form, this is the form of the most walkable communities in the world. Think Paris, think Barcelona, think small villages as well, like in Ambleside. But we can create real walkability with that mid-rise form in British Columbia. There's now a new code for 7 to 12-story wood prefab mass timber construction. So that housing is so important. The other, and I'm going to be, I can say this because I'm not from West Vancouver. I cycle through here all the time, though. So I'm going to flip on the PowerPoint again. The other is congestion management and attractive transportation choices. And this is also related to our demography. So if you look at 45, 55, 65, 75, 85, these are 100% of your trips. At age 45, so this is 50, 25, 75, 80% of your trips are by car. At age 85, guess what they are? By a car that you drive. What's that? Zero. It's 30. It's 30, right? That's a precipitous decline. And this is a really important dynamic space, right? And so what's filled up? Well, it's interesting. 65-year-olds often cycle and walk more than 45-year-olds. This is the squeeze generation, looking after their kids, looking after their parents. They are driving all over the place. 35% of the trips on the North Shore are to ferry somebody else around. They're chaperone trips. But we have to create attractive transportation choices for these folks in here. We really do. And it's walking. I love the greenways, the blueways into greenways. What an excellent idea to allow people to, you create beautiful walking environments for people to walk down to the waterfront. You create so walking, cycling infrastructure, and I'm going to say it, and this is where, I hope I can cycle fast enough when I leave, really be thinking about that rapid bus again. But thinking about it really creatively, and this is where I actually concur with some lots of businesses on Marine Drive, concerned about access to parking, and that's how so many people to get in their shops. That is a really legitimate concern, and we have to think outside of the box in terms of solutions. And maybe it's a commitment that 80% of those parking spaces are retained within 400 meters of Marine Drive, and you exploit those. You actually have some wonderful alleys you don't want more parking in. Some of the best alleys around, I would say, laneways. But there's some of those laneways, like between Dutchess and Marine and Clyde and Marine, that are underutilized. Perhaps there's places for parking there. There's places, other places for parking. But thinking about really amazing bus access, because as we age, we need it. This is the most dynamic time, other than in our 20-year-old, other than when you're 15, 16, 17, where these transportation choices really, really are so dynamic. Another third one, so transportation choice that's attractive. Another one that I think is really important, and most of you are going to agree with me, I believe, on this one, but is managing upwards pressure on property taxes and utility fees. It really is. And I'll give you a linear meter of civic infrastructure really, really matters. Think about it. Water, sewage, stormwater, roads. Those are all linear services delivered by, by the district, and they cost dough. A single-family home, especially in British properties, up to 40 linear meters per household. Down near the apartment area, 7 meters per household. The cost of that, the difference is profound. Apartment dwellers are actually subsidizing people that live in British properties. That's just the way things work. So if West Vancouver wants to manage some of the fastest growing growth in taxes and utility fees, a part of that is about a greater degree of intensification. And what's laid out here, I think, is really, really moderate. And that is going to actually really help West Vancouver on an enduring basis manage property tax and infrastructure, utility fee growth. The last one, I won't even mention it.
Alex, we'll come back. We'll give you some time. But thank you for that. Andy, going to you. So when a district considers an OCP or a mini OCP, the local area plan, our good friends, the developers, who of course many of us are criticized, but the reality is they build housing. But they'll look for these opportunities where they'll be upzoning and rezoning to build housing, but also to make a profit, which is what they are driven by. How are we going to manage that, and what are the opportunities with respect to, we talked about housing, we talked about transportation, but Alex referred to the civic infrastructure that is absolutely critical to making a livable city and community. Please comment or share your thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'll stand up only because I'm more comfortable in doing so. I'm certainly not the great expert, and I don't have the answer right now. And I guess, again, back to why we have these dialogues, because I think out of that may emerge a consensus as to what is it that we hold dear, and then the developer will need to understand that that's the line that will not cross. But to not have development isn't going to be an answer either. 50 years ago, I don't know, I'm looking around the room, and I'm going to guess that there may have been several of you that were at a few protests that I was at 50 years ago, where we did not like the idea of a third crossing. No third crossing, we said. And because there was a real plan to have a third crossing coming into, if you remember, coming into West Van. We stopped, I shouldn't say we stopped it, it was stopped. The councils from that day on merely wrung their hands and said, great, we don't have to worry about all of the traffic coming into West Vancouver and our beautiful West Vancouver developing. But at the same time, there was no thinking about transportation infrastructure. And what there wasn't a lot of thought given is it's not West Vancouver that's going to create the chaos, it's everything around us. So it's whether it's the Sunshine Coast, whether it's the people that have to come in from Surrey in order to work in West Van, whether it's the skiers to Whistler, etc. So what I'm saying is no planning is a plan, and it's not a useful plan. So how do we come together? And Alex mentioned the quote that our neighborhood character and dialogue came out of that particular study in 2008. And it was a former planner that said it, and it really rung true, and that is, in order for West Vancouver to stay the same, it has to change. But there's also another quote that I remember, and that is that there is a distinct and unique character of West Vancouver that the people of West Vancouver truly engage and truly appreciate. It's how you make those two things work, and they're not exclusive. And unfortunately, sometimes we get into a debate as to should it be one or the other. And the developers get placed in one corner and residents get placed in the other. That's not how we bring about formative change that we need. What we have to do, I think, is work towards a set of standards that we as a community truly appreciate. I think the three options give us a start to say how in Ambleside does that work, and then hold developers to that standard. But at the same time say, but we need within that, we need housing that can be affordable. We need housing that seniors can move into. We need any number of things that are our needs as those standards are placed. And I think that's the evolution process. It can be messy, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. It does mean that you will need to come to more meetings. You will need to listen. We'll all need to listen. But out of it, I think we can create a community that we won't be wringing our hands and say, oh good, we didn't, we've stopped the change. But we can actually look at a community 20, 25 years from now, if we didn't make it to the cemetery, and see that it actually is a community that has engaged people. So a long way of saying, it's not as if there is a particular answer to the developer, but I think developers are smart enough that if they know that there is a consensus in the community around certain things, and I'll just use one final example, we've done that in West Vancouver, and it's called the Kiwanis Housing. That's going to be going in not too far from here. It took some time, and I know not everybody is pleased and happy with it, but I would say the great majority are. And one of the reasons is because it addressed some real needs that the community said, developers got it, and they'll get their money as well.
I'm thinking about this word character. I think that one of the things that has perhaps fallen away a bit in the planning processes in more recent times that I think is really important is that there is a true essence to a community. There is character. People use the word character sometimes to say they don't want change. But it's possible to have change and still be thoughtful about what really matters to you about a community and what can be held on to and what can be asked of developers to deliver that resonates with people as being of the place. In a local area plan, you create development permit areas. And wherever you have multiple family housing or commercial areas, you can have design guidelines and you can hold developers to a standard that's created by the community of how you want things to look and feel. Some of this can be a response to the way West Vancouver is embedded in nature and how important nature is to people. The ability to hike on trails, to get quickly to natural places, to get to the beach, to walk in the forest. But it also can be things that influence the look and feel of the built form and also the mix of amenities. And for West Vancouver, it's not that big a challenge because you have some very good development examples. Communities, schools, this complex, where people have used materials and thought about how forms and shapes resonate with nature and with the built form and the heritage of the community. So I would encourage you to have those conversations and ask of the district that when they put the LAP in place, that they also reflect your understanding of the character of the place.
You asked me about it was around the objectives, and the housing, transportation choice, tax and utility fee management. I'm not going to say, holding the line. It's managing the growth of that because it is going to grow. But the last one, and I think it's in many of these, and it's just about, healthy, I don't think the healthy people here is prominently enough. Like creating great places for people to walk, right? It's partially reflected in here, but also healthy natural environment. So healthy people and places. And I think those are some of the things to work with. And I love so many elements in here, but I think there should be some really thoughtful reflection on what the community is trying to achieve. And I remember a Haida elder told me once, when it came to consensus is when everybody leaves the table and they feel like they they didn't quite get something that he wanted. But they can live with it, right? It isn't perfect, but I'm getting a lot of what I want. It isn't unanimity, right? And that'll never be achieved. But are we getting most of the things that we really want and our need for ourselves, for my neighbors, for our children, for future generations? And thinking about what can we live with and what do we really want?
What's your view of what not Andy's view, but what do you think the community wants out of this LAPP? What are they looking for?
A place to live, a place they continue to live. I mean, I think it's true enough to say that West Vancouver's come back or remain. I know that as I say, I sort of grew up here through high school anyway, university, and started teaching in North Van, etc. And then I moved to Kitsilano, and by this time I was partnered up, and I was able to convince my spouse, my wife, who was a Dunbar girl. And you that are West Side Dunbar people, you know how committed you are to that. And when I suggested that I wanted to come back to West Van, I might as well have said I want to go to Romania or, the Far East. And what was it that was drawing me to it? It was, as we've said, the fact that you can walk out of your door, which we're able to do, and within 10 minutes have some of the finest walks and some of the finest hikes that you'll have anywhere. Kitsilano was great, but the hike was to the great restaurant. What is it that we want? We want to be able to cherish this place, but we know that in order, and therefore to have as many people who are West Vanners and who are not West Vanners to truly take advantage of it. But let's take a look at what they want and what they're saying they need, being those that are in West Van and those that need to be in West Van. Not just what we as individuals think, but listen to what others are saying and find a way in which we can create that West Vancouver in the next 25 years that can house people who are part of us, whether they take care of us directly or indirectly, or who are part of us because they're family, or who are part of us because they too love the rocks. And by the way, there is no way, and she's not here, but there's no way that I convinced my wife to move back to Dunbar. So, we do have something that we very much cherish, but there's no reason to think that we cannot widen it so that a greater number. And I've got, and you all do, and this options booklet, and we both pointed to it, is a very, very well put together document. But the one piece of that document I keep going back to is on page, I believe it is 4. And I would truly, truly urge all of us to keep looking at that, because those are the facts. And that's the sort of points to the trends that West Vancouver is part of, and especially Ambleside as part of West Van. And so just to point out one or two of those that again signify why it's so important to have the Ambleside conversation, never mind the West Vancouver conversation. And that is that, first of all, about 1/5 of the population lives within the Ambleside area plan. In the rest of West Vancouver, 21% of West Vanners are renters. In Ambleside, it's 48%. And you can only imagine that that's going to go up. Percentage of single person households, and this one is surprising. In West Vancouver, this is single person household, 28%. Ambleside, it is 57%. So that's the kind, and there's lots of other facts in there. That's what we're talking about in terms of trying to mold it into something that is sustainable over time. And that as these percentages continue to increase in certain areas, as they continue to, that the housing form, and for that matter, and I keep going back to amenities, and Alex has talked about the pathways and the various transportation routes, that all of those things are there fit for purpose so that we can continue to have West Vancouver being the place that people want to live in.
Thanks, Andy. That's a really important point on the very interesting stat on the number of single person households in Ambleside. I mean, our organization spends a lot of time working with seniors around social isolation, and that's a critical point, I think, in the Ambleside conversation as well for planning for the future. How do you manage to create an environment where people can connect, even if they are living in a single person household? That's critical to sustainability on the social side as well. And any comments there? I think I've got time for maybe one more comment, and then I think we're going to move on.
Well, I just echo what you said, as there are more opportunities for multiple housing forms in Ambleside, to make sure that if that's a real value for the community, and it should be, people who are lonely are not going to be healthy, and they would really value the opportunity to get to know their neighbors and do things together. Good housing design can facilitate that, and it can be part of the conversation and part of what you ask to be embedded in the requirements for housing form.
How can we discourage property speculation through this local area planning process?
It's not a question of, how do you keep them from it? It's more a case of how do you get them to where you want them to be? So it's setting up the goals and the expectations, and that's why this process is so critical, so that they know that they can't go to where they might want to go without where you've already arrived at. And that's where, good processes will lead us to a place where the community can talk back and say, that's not what we designed when we wrote the plan. So for example, I'll play with me for a minute here, and I know there's some people in this room that are far more knowledgeable about this than I am. But Horseshoe Bay and Sewells. So as you know, the Horseshoe Bay local area plan came together about 3 years ago, and from the OCP. And in it are some very, very specific things about rise and high rise and mid rise and lack of high rise, et cetera, et cetera. We came to consensus. I say we because a number of us were on a bit of a focus group that worked through it, and not everything that everybody wanted happened, but it happened. And then you look at the Sewells building that's and not to pick on Sewells, but I'm just using it as an exemplar. And everybody's saying, well, look at what happened, look at what they developed, because there were no guidelines. And Sewells was done before the local area plan went in. So it's the local area plan can be a very, very critical way in which the community guides the developer rather than the developer guides.
We have to really exploit tools that are available. So, it's not perfect, but, City of Vancouver last year, 6-story on any single family arterial, 4-story one block in, minimum affordability requirements in terms of price below market. I don't think that's sufficient. It should be based on income. But a nice instrument like that also slows down the rate of construction. It really does. And that is really quite important for allowing organic change in a community. Another thing, we can do that at a multiplex on a single family parcel, 3 or 4 units, or just on a laneway. You can actually reduce the amount of land lift, stratify a laneway home, and then you can require it to be sold 30% below market. And the only people that can buy it are people that have no other property title, right? And that means that people can begin to enter into the marketplace. Something we have to do, and I love sessions like this. I found out that workforce housing is a terrible name, so I still want to hear what a better one is. But let's call it speculation-free housing. We need to think really creatively about how we take advantage of underutilized public lands in West Vancouver, across British Columbia, and we have thousands of them. And this might not be the location, but think about the day parking at Horseshoe Bay Ferry Terminal. Why is it a surface parking lot? Why couldn't it be 3 or 4 stories? So on public land, we already own it. Let's put it housing on top of there. And once again, the only people that can buy into it, or if it's rental, then it's mandatorily affordable. Moreover, if we do enough of these, what we have to be doing is moving a vast majority of our construction onto the assembly line. And this has to be a really concerted effort where we actually really push off-site building manufacturing on a whole bunch of different types of land, privately held land, publicly held land. But this is one of the only ways that we're going to actually bring down construction prices on an enduring basis, because we have a flat labor force. We will never meet our housing requirements by building in situ. So that's something that, you know, is beyond the local area plan, but it's imperative for the province to go in this direction.
So how do we marry character, design, maybe even charm, but character and design into the local area planning, which is primarily around land use? And so a follow-on question to that is, in those types of situations, how does design or design councils get reflected?
The idea of how you look at these 3 plans is really important. That you should look at it block by block and try to imagine what the adjacencies would be if you had the cluster of higher buildings around the community center, what that would be like, and give your feedback on a fairly detailed basis. I think that it's very important to consider how the design can reflect what Ambleside means to people. We had a really interesting conversation at the table that I was listening in on. That character is probably not the right word, that it's more a question of feel and activity and what you do in the place and how you can extend the way people like to live and to build in the sense of community that we talked about earlier as well. And I just would encourage you all to bring the design piece into your conversation. It's not just about how high it is, but what it looks like and what it does to the neighboring uses. So if you have a park, you don't want it overshadowed. If you have a heritage building, you want to be able to have that building be there forever without feeling that it's crowded or overlooked or dominated by what's next to it. So I think the conversation about character and values has to be tracked along with how you respond to these 3 plans.
This band has actually done, I think, a really nice job of the character question on single-family zoning within the OCP. There was a working group that was struck about 3 years ago, and it reported out, and it's now part of policy, that tried to answer the question, what is character? And so there are some design principles that are being put together. And it's one, you know, the question of design it's an aesthetic, and it's one that becomes very subjective. So trying to standardize it so that all of us understand it in the same way is not a particularly easy thing, because my idea of proper design principles may not be yours. But when it comes to the single family situations, we've actually got something written down, and I would urge you to have a look at what it says there. That's for areas outside of the local area plan. That's for the areas in the OCP. So there are ways in which you can sit down and look at that design. And the other thing I would comment is, you know, we all, in our table, one of the questions that was asked is, what are other communities doing? How are they tackling the same problem? West Van probably has more acute than others because of our aging situation, but every community has had to come at it. We can all, each of us, probably mention various examples as we drive around the Lower Mainland that immediately come to us as making some sense, and some of it is probably because some design principles were put into place that aesthetically, as we drive through, appeal. So again, I think it can be done, but it's one that, again, needs the engagement of people to understand how that's going to get done.
Good evening. So the question that we wanted to ask is, there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. So we know that housing, affordability, housing form, and transportation are key issues. And the question to the panel is, which of those issues needs to be addressed first and why?
You can't address one of them before the other. They actually have to be integrated. You know, there was a conversation around our table, and I learned so much just listening to people that there wasn't an observation, we have to focus the housing on the transit corridors. If you put a lot of density in places where there isn't good transit, you end up with gridlock. You really want to focus your housing on those transportation corridors. And a great observation here is you want to have mixed use on those corridors as well. Like, you know, a big share of people's trips in their lives are short trips, you know, a kilometer. You want to have, make it a pleasant experience for people to be able to walk to the butcher, the baker, the cappuccino maker. If they don't have that option and it's not attractive, they're going to drive there. So there's great things that are in this plan to make it attractive for people to walk, but we've got to put people on those transit corridors. To give you a sense, every rider that gets on a bus on the Lonsdale Quarter, it costs TransLink $1. It's a money maker. The same on Hastings, the same on Broadway. Marine Drive will never have that. You know how much it costs to put a person on a bus going out to Lions Bay? $40. Every single person that gets on that bus. We can't send transit everywhere. Transit's got to go to the places where we have density, and we don't need high-rise density. That's one of the great things. It's mid-rise. We can do a lot with mid-rise. The most walkable places and the highest transit use in the world, they barely have buildings over 8 stories tall. That would be a Barcelona. Paris is 13 stories in the downtown area. We can do a huge amount with low-rise. We have too much sprawl and too much tall. We need a whole bunch of missing middle and missing little.
So we feel that infrastructure and services needs to be addressed first and foremost when discussing LAP. And being mindful of this is key. Infrastructure like hospitals, ambulance, schools, water, sewage, rain pipes, traffic, public transportation. And how will this be addressed when addressing the missing middle?
As Alex said, this is your chance for the plan. There's no way to say we're going to look at this and we'll look at that later. It all is intertwined, and that's what makes planning so interesting and complicated. So I think that it's really important to raise the questions that you've raised about infrastructure and cost, and challenge the district staff when you're meeting with them to provide you with the data that links those things together, so that when you're having the conversations about what it's going to cost, it's on the table and part of the conversation. It is important to do that. It's not just that you want to build housing here and have housing there. There should be a conversation about this area has the sewer pipes and the water and the road widths to take more density. It's not just that it would be nice to have higher buildings here and not higher buildings there. There's a underlying set of real information that will inform these plans, and I'm sure that the district staff have looked at that in their 3 options already. But it's up to you to challenge them and inquire about it and find out if those things are fully considered. Because the other piece, of course, when you're densifying for housing is making sure that the amenities are keeping up and nearby as well.
One of the real challenges with infrastructure cost is it's way cheaper to do single-family greenfield development. Never been done before. It's low capital cost, right? But you never, ever, ever generate the revenue to operate, maintain, and replace that infrastructure. It's way more expensive to do infill. right? When you're adding some density and you're not just replacing a single-family home with a single-family home. But the reality is when you get medium density, you can get the revenue through taxes and utility fees to operate, maintain, and replace that infrastructure. And this is something we really have to think of. You made a great question around hospitals. We very, very rarely think of prevention. You can take out your phone right now, go to walkscore.com, put in your postal code, and find out what your walk score is. If it's less than 90, it's more than 50% likely that you, your family, your neighbors are obese or overweight. Right? That's the reality. Only if you live in a highly walkable neighborhood. We have to make our neighborhoods walkable. And that is going to be huge in reducing healthcare expenditures on a long-term basis. It really is. And I kid you not, great study at UBC by Larry Frank on this very space, in the order of 30% around cardiovascular costs reduced if you live in a walkable neighborhood.
This is a bit of a hybrid of what our table came up with, but I know we're very special. And not our table, everybody. In my sector, but what I wonder is how unique are we? And so where are some other communities that have dealt with this and not having to reinvent everything all the time? No one's going to be exactly parallel, but there must be some out there in the world somewhere that have figured out answers to some of these in a way that we can actually learn from.
Many of us, because we live in West Van, I'm not saying all of us, have had the good fortune of traveling around, whether it's North America or the world, and have seen what looks like exemplars. But I'm not going to get too exotic. I'm just going to go to a place that I know something about, which is not that far from here. And I know it probably is sacrilegious for me to say it, but I'm going to say it. Port Moody. If you, and I'm not talking about all of Port Moody, but if you were to travel across a few waterways and make it to Port Moody and see what they've done in terms of the village settings in Port Moody. There are some high rises, so they're not all perfect mid rises. That's true. But where there are the mid rises, what you're now seeing is a community, Port Moody, which is a younger generation and an older generation at the same time. And this did not happen by accident. It happened as a result of some planning that was done 10, 15 years ago deliberately to try to create a level of housing that allowed younger families to come in as older families. And I'll only make one other comment. Back to the infrastructure piece. Infrastructure takes money. Money needs taxpayers. And if we somehow don't keep thinking about folks coming in to live here who can pay taxes, then it becomes a vicious circle where there aren't enough people to pay for an infrastructure and there isn't enough infrastructure to house people. And that's not a livable community.
Why are we densifying? Because I hear a lot of questions about affordability and we need to create affordability, etc. Can you hear me? I can just scream. That's probably easier if I just...
No, better with the mic.
Okay. But like, if we're building for affordability, current construction costs are not going to produce affordable units, right? So then we're going to have to look at government intervention to create affordability. Now, if we're looking just to create density, because we want taxpayer dollars, because we want to bring other people in, that frames what we're developing very differently. Because now we're not looking at building the cheapest thing possible, we're looking at building something that is aesthetically pleasing, that fits into the neighborhood, yada, yada, yada. I just would like to have a more clear understanding of why we want to densify, because I see so much densification sort of framed under this sort of overarching, we're going to make it affordable, and that's really not the reality, because like right now, we just did a duplex in Vancouver, and the cost of the duplex at the lot was like 1.9 million. Each one of those units sold for 1.9 million. So you could have bought a whole house for yourself, or you could buy half a house.
I think it's an excellent question. And there's two things we need. We need affordability and we need supply. And they're both different. And we can exploit existing policies to reduce the cost, And to go back to the distinct society question over here, or why are we special? We do have to learn from other jurisdictions. And one example, 80% of single family in Sweden is built in off-site manufactured plants, right? That's where we have to go. And one of the reasons they're doing that is because of our demographic reality. OECD countries do not, we have a flat and declining labor force. It's been flat for 15 years. Our construction labor force has shrunk by 3% in the last 5 years. And it matches what's happening with housing supply. So we can double the productivity. We really, really have to do that. But we can use these other instruments. Can we get other forms of supply? We can go to places like California. California is now starting to build, and I'm going to call it speculation-free housing, because workforce housing isn't very resonant, on school lands. Not all schools are appropriate. Hollyburn would be terrible. There's not enough play area as it is. But maybe some of the other schools are. There's over 100 projects in the pipeline in California where teacher and staff housing is going on to existing public school land. We have to think about how do we integrate housing into our next rec center, the next upgrade to a library, another fire hall. You name it, we have to think really creatively and put some tools in there to make it permanently affordable.
The lack of planning, and which was because of the lack of consistency of management and governance through the passing parade of councils. So the councils come in for four years, and then the longer term plan you need for all of this stuff goes out the window because the winds come through. So that's the basic
Very question.
The question is, how do you avoid that and get consistency of planning and management throughout all these issues, the transportation, housing, you name it, they're all in.
Going back to my first comments on the way an OCP is embedded in the law and in the provincial requirements and the regional requirements, that it's true that councils come and go, and there's been a lot of change, and it's a lot of pressure on the councils in the past to avoid making plans that were going to change the community in substantial ways. But we are expecting many, many hundreds of thousands of people coming to Vancouver. There is a requirement for West Vancouver to do its share. And just the fact that households are getting so small here, 1 and 2 people households, where it used to be 3, 4, 5 people in the household, you need to build more housing. So that then generates the question of what kind of housing do you want to build, and for whom, and can you do it in a way that increases the values that you have in the community and lets more people live here. I think it's really important. There was a comment at the table I was listening in on that it used to be the firefighters and the police that were the coaches for the school teams, the little kids' soccer teams, and there's a piece of your community that has been lost that was part of the fabric of the community. So there are ways to get affordable housing back. Alex has mentioned some. There are other things that can be done by the council mandating that you only get to build a certain density more if you make sure that some of those units are affordable in perpetuity. Those are the kinds of tools that West Vancouver hasn't used yet. They've been reluctant to, but they're there to be used, and there are lots of examples around the region